So on Sukkahs, sometimes we need to be in the Sukkah and sometimes we don't need to be in the Sukkah. So when are the times that you must be in the Sukkah? So the 4 levels of Chiyuv are, number 1, things that a person needs to do in the Sukkah. You cannot do this outside of the Sukkah on Sukkahs. So something that you regularly only do in your home, including sleeping and eating a seuda, a set meal. So that is something that must be done in the Sukkah. So number 2 of the level of Chiyuv is things that it's a mitzvah to do in the Sukkah. If you do it in the Sukkah, you get a mitzvah for doing it in a Sukkah, but you don't have to only do it in the Sukkah. So this includes, let's say, learning Torah, having a conversation, reading a book, eating a snack. These are all good things to do in the Sukkah, and if you do it in the Sukkah, you get a mitzvah for doing it in the Sukkah. But if you don't do it in the Sukkah, you don't have an avera, it's okay. So an important concept is if you are standing 10 feet from your Sukkah and there's no reason not to eat your meal in the Sukkah or have a conversation in the Sukkah, and you could just as easily do it in the Sukkah as you can do it outside of the Sukkah, it's a bizayon to the mitzvah if you don't just do that in the Sukkah. It's better to do that in the Sukkah than out of the Sukkah. Okay, so number 3. So these are things that are not a mitzvah to do in the Sukkah. So these are things that you always do outside of your house. So lichatchila, you can do that outside of the Sukkah. Davening a minyan, going to a shiur, going to Torah class. So these are things that you generally would not do in your Sukkah. And lichatchila, you don't have to do it in the Sukkah. So somebody who regularly has a seder after Shacharis to spend 3 hours learning after Shacharis, he goes to the Beis Midrash and does his learning. He learns best in the Beis Midrash. It'd be better for him to do that learning in the Beis Midrash rather than come to Sukkah where he's going to have a bit less of a good learning. He always does that outside of his home. Therefore, he can always do it outside of his Sukkah. Okay, and then number 4, things that you cannot do in the Sukkah, things that are also doing in the Sukkah are things that are shameful, like changing a baby's diaper, doing laundry. These are things that should not be done in the Sukkah because the Sukkah has a level of Kedusha. We should treat it with the proper respect that it deserves. So women do not have to sit in the Sukkah at all because it's a mitzvah, seishes man grama. But when they do sit in the Sukkah, they're fulfilling a mitzvah. Regarding blessing, Ashkenazim and some Sephardi women do bless, and most Sephardim don't bless Leshev Basukkah. That's the usual breakdown when it comes to a mitzvah, kiyam mitzvah. So this idea of l'dor derech kavod. So you have to think of your Sukkah. You have to give the proper respect to your Sukkah. So your Sukkah should be thought of as the nicest room in your home. So in the same way that you wouldn't fold your laundry or change a diaper on your dining room table, you shouldn't do that in your Sukkah. So for that same reason, your Sukkah should be thought of as a respectable place. Right after you finish your meal, you should quickly clear off the table. You should not leave dirty dishes in the Sukkah. You should treat it always respectfully. So you may play games or have conversations in the Sukkah. It's not just taking away from its respect, but shameful things or something that's dirty. Your Sukkah should look nice. It should you should treat that Sukkah with respect. Okay, so now generally the idea of eating the Sukkah. This again does mainly pertain to men, but women who take this upon themselves, it's still a good thing. Okay, so as we said, it's a mitzvah to eat meals in the Sukkah, but snacks don't have to be in the Sukkah. Some people decide that they want to eat everything in the Sukkah. They're not gonna eat anything outside the Sukkah. My dad tells me that his grandfather would not even drink a cup of tea outside the Sukkah, all Sukkahs, which is an amazing thing to do. It's not a requirement, but it is a hidur mitzvah. It is a very nice thing to do. A meal. Okay, so what is considered a snack and what's considered a meal? So a meal is considered something which is meant to satisfy a person. After the meal, you won't feel the need, you won't feel the desire to eat anything else. And a snack is considered something that is just meant for enjoyment. It's something that's just going to diminish your hunger. After that snack, you know you're still going to be hungry. So that is considered a snack. It does not have to be eaten only in the Sukkah. That can be eaten outside the Sukkah. But we still have to make a distinction between grains and everything else, because grains, as we know, are very important food. Meals are set on bread. So because a grain is an important food, anytime that a person has a grain product larger than the volume of an egg, so larger than a kibetza, that is considered a meal, and he must eat this in the sukkah. So bread, cookies, pasta, couscous, oatmeal, these foods, if you're eaten within a big enough volume, do need to be in the sukkah, even if you're not setting a meal on that food. So if you only have a kibetza of cookies or oatmeal or couscous, that's not going to fill you up. It's not going to feel like a full meal. Because it's an important food, anytime you have that volume of mazonos, it has to be done in the sukkah. You can't eat it outside the sukkah. Fruit, water, juice, these things are never have a meal made upon them. So you can eat them in unlimited amounts outside the sukkah because you're never going to make a meal off of apples. So I could eat 10 apples outside the sukkah, and that's totally mutter, even though I'm going to be satisfied from that, because normally people don't make meals from apples. Meats, fish, and cheese can be eaten outside of the sukkah in small amounts, but once you eat a large enough amount of these important foods to constitute a meal, that does have to be eaten in the sukkah. So if you want to taste a piece of brisket, whatever it is, you can go ahead and taste that outside the sukkah. You could have a little bit, but once you have enough that it's going to constitute a meal, that does need to be made inside the sukkah. So regarding alcoholic drinks, there is a difference according to the poskim. So the Rosh and the Ramah say that they can be had outside the sukkah, and the Ritva says that a revis of wine must be eaten in the sukkah. So according to the strict opinion, which this is really the appropriate way to follow, if you're having alcoholic drinks in a group, that is considered an important enough situation where it should be had in the sukkah lechatchila. Again, this is a very important thing to point out. So anytime you're having a meal in the sukkah, now every single thing that you're eating counts in that meal. So normally you don't have to have your maybe apple's a bad example, but normally you wouldn't have to have, like, let's say a salad in the sukkah if you're not setting a meal on it. But if once you have a motzi and that salad now counts as part of your meal, you can't even eat that salad outside of the sukkah. And not only that, even if you're eating that salad in the sukkah or bread or whatever it is in the sukkah, and then you want to go outside to help out bring the food into the sukkah, you can't go out with food that's still in your mouth and then swallow it outside the sukkah, because that's considered eating outside the sukkah. So once you're eating a meal, you have to be very careful that all the food you're eating during that meal is inside the sukkah. So once you're helping out in the kitchen, don't throw anything in your mouth. That all has to be eaten inside the sukkah. So now getting into this a bit of a complicated topic of the Bracha of Leshev Basukkah. There are different minhagim according to different traditions. So according to the Taimani minhag, the Yemenites, they bless every time they even enter into a sukkah. So a Yemenite can walk into a sukkah, he just blesses and he sits down. He makes the bracha. Okay, so the Ashkenaz minhag is that anyone who eats an important food, like mazonot or wine, makes a bracha, even if he doesn't plan on eating a large amount. As well, somebody who has a set meal of fish, meat, or cheese does bless. But again, what that means is that if you're going to go ahead and eat a small amount of mazonot and you're not planning on eating so much more, an Ashkenaz person would go ahead and bless. The minhag of the Sfaradim is to make the bracha on eating something which is important enough to set up a seudah. So even if you're just going to have a small amount of bread, according to Sfaradim, you would not make the bracha of Leshev Basukkah. You'd have, say that again, excuse me. So on bread, the size of an egg, that's considered a meal. So you would make a bracha of Leshev Basukkah on that. Something that's mazonos, you would be filled up on 4 eggs volume worth of mazonos. So anything above 4 beitzas of mazonos, a Sephardi person would bless. But just eating a very small amount of mazonos in the sukkah, a Sephardi person would not bless. So that's the difference between Ashkenaz and Sephardi. Let's say I have 1 cookie, an Ashkenaz person would bless on eating that 1 cookie, Leshev Basukkah, and the Sephardi person just on 1 cookie would not bless. Okay, so just getting into the details of this bracha. So there's a difference in opinion on what do you bless first. Do you bless on the blessing on the food first, or do you say Leshev Basukkah first? So Ashkenazim and some Sephardim say the bracha first on the food and then Leshev Basukkah. The opinion on this is that you're only making the blessing of Leshev Basukkah because you're eating the food. So that's why it comes after. And some Sephardim make the bracha of Leshev Basukkah first, and then they make the bracha on the food. So in most cases, what you should do is follow the minhag of your father. If your father does, whichever order he follows, that would be best. If you're not sure, Ashkenaz could stick with his Ashkenaz minhag, and Sephardim can hopefully understand what their father does. Okay. So what happens if you forget to say the bracha on Leshev Basukkah? So if you forget, you could say it during the meal. So you started eating your food, you realize after a few bites, you forgot to say the bracha Leshev Basukkah. Go ahead, say Leshev Basukkah during the meal. Okay, so if you finish after eating the main part of the meal, you already had like the main course. So ideally what you should do is you could say the bracha and then eat or drink something else. And then that really does count as an extension of your meal. If you remember after the meal, most poskim say that you bless even though you don't plan on eating more. The Sephardic minhag is just not to make the bracha. You lost out on the opportunity of making the bracha. Okay, so a few more laws. As long as a person stays in his sukkah, the first bracha of Leshev Basukkah he made covers him as long as he stays in that sukkah. So let's say you had breakfast in your sukkah at 10 a.m. and you said a Leshev Basukkah then, and then for 6 hours you stay in the sukkah, and then at lunch you want to have lunch. Okay, so at that point you don't make a new Leshev Basukkah because the first bracha covered you for that entire time period, and this includes small things that you left your sukkah to go do something small. So if you go to the bathroom, if you have a conversation, if you do something small like preparing your food or getting your food out. In those cases, that first bracha still covers you. But if you leave the sukkah for something important, so if you leave your house to go to minyan, to go to work, when you come back, you would have to say another Leshev Basukkah. So leaving your house for something that's significant forces you to say another Leshev Basukkah when you return. Okay, so sleeping in the sukkah. Both sleeping and napping need to be done only in the sukkah. For a person only sleeps in his own bed. He's never gonna take like a real nap outside of his home. So for that reason, you have to do that in the sukkah during sukkahs. So it's important to point out that sometimes people do doze off in the middle of a shiur. Sometimes people are very tired. You got no sleep in the sukkah last night. It's hard to sleep in the sukkah. Okay, so in that case, you would not have an avon on your hands. It's not a sin if you doze off during a shiur or like you fall asleep at the table for a few minutes at the Beit Midrash. For sleep like this is not normally done in your home. Okay, so a sick person and his helper are patur from the sukkah. And a sick person is not just considered someone who's dangerously ill. A sick person is anyone who has a cold, who has a headache. So somebody who has a headache and finds it hard to sleep in the sukkah, he is going to be patur from the sukkah. So now we'll go into the whole idea of mitztaer. A mitztaer is patur from the sukkah. So what is a mitztaer? Of course, a sukkah in nature is outside. It's going to be less comfortable than your regular bed. But this level of this difference in comfort is not going to consider you a mitztaer. So just because it's more comfortable in my bed and it's less comfortable in my sukkah, that doesn't make me mitztaer and I'm now patur from the sukkah. It has to be something that's specific or something that's a specific additional cause of suffering that you don't normally have to deal with in your bed. So if it rains, if it's extremely cold, if it's extremely hot in a sukkah, and you really are having a hard time sleeping, considered mitztaer, and you are patur from the sukkah. Okay, so the discomfort must be meaningful to the person for him to be mitztaer. And the general rule is if that discomfort, which is bothering you in the sukkah, would cause you to get up from your bed and go somewhere else, that is considered a meaningful enough situation that you can be considered mitztaer. Okay, so if it would be mitztaer for something, if you would be considered mitztaer there in terms of sleep, but not in terms of eating, so you're patur from sleeping in the sukkah and chayav and eating in the sukkah. So let's say it's very cold. Let's say it's very cold in your sukkah, and for some reason it's really bothering you when you're sleeping, but when you're out and you're about and you're talking and you're in your clothes, you're able to eat in the sukkah and not be so mitzvah from it. So eating, you have to do in the sukkah. Sleeping, you would be considered mitzvah. You're allowed to do it outside the sukkah. Also important to mention, if you left the sukkah because of a specific reason that made you mitzvah, began to rain in the middle of your meal, in the middle of your sleep. So you're like, okay, I'm mitzvah. I'm going inside the house now to finish my meal, to finish sleeping. So let's say you're sleeping in bed, and 3 hours later, it's now 4 a.m. It stopped raining. It's a perfect day outside to go sleep in the sukkah. You're not now chayav to go back into the sukkah. You're not chayav to go back in the middle of the night into your sukkah and move your whole self. That's unnecessary. Okay, so let's talk about some specifics. Let's say you have a lot of flies or mosquitoes bothering you and you can't fall asleep because of it. If there's a very bad smell where your sukkah is, it's very hot, it's very cold. So that if you were in your home with those conditions, you would get up and move. So those cases would also make you mitzvah, and you're allowed to sleep outside of your sukkah. So a person who is just a very sensitive person by nature, and for him, he is mitzvah, but a normal person would be totally fine with that condition. He is considered mitzvah. But you shouldn't use this kula as, or it's not really cool, but you can't really use this to be making on yourself. You can't say, oh, it's really cold and I'm not able to sleep here, even if you really are. So you should be honest. Only Hashem will know the truth, but it's not a great mitzvah to cheat out on. It's really geshmak mitzvah to sleep in the sukkah. Mamish, you just wake up and you just realize that I just did nothing all night. I was just sleeping and I woke up and did all these mitzvahs. It's a great thing. So be real if you think that it'll ruin your next day, and it won't be what's best for you, and you have a specific case where you would be mitzvah, okay, so don't sleep in the sukkah. But be real. If you could sleep in the sukkah, it's not a big deal. If you'll fall asleep, it's just a bit less comfortable. Make the effort. It's a good thing. Okay, so let's say, I think some Chabad people do this, but let's say a person is being very stubborn and he really insists on eating the sukkah, even though there's something that makes him mitzvah. So it's pouring outside, and he's insisting that he has to eat in the sukkah. So he's sitting outside in the rain. So Melamed says that's not really a good thing. He says he's not doing a mitzvah at all. And he says, in an interesting language, he says there's a side of an isser in doing this, because he's disrespecting the chag. And the chag, you're supposed to be happy, you're supposed to enjoy yourself. So if you're sitting outside in the rain and getting sopping wet, it's not a great thing. It's not a great way to respect the chag. You really shouldn't sleep in the sukkah when it rains. You're not going to sleep at all. You're going to be all wet. You're going to get sick. That's not the way to respect the chag. And it might not be a good thing to do this. You might think you're being a gibor, you're being a great guy. I'm sleeping in the sukkah anyways. It might not be a great thing. Okay, so nowadays we could see that a lot of people don't sleep in the sukkah. And the question is that okay? Like, do they have something to rely on? Let's see. So Ashkenazic minhag back in Europe, when Sukkot ended up pretty late in the calendar, even early in the calendar, it got very, very cold. And people were getting sick. The poskim saw this and they were lenient about this condition, and they saw people getting sick. Okay, so not everybody needs to sleep in the sukkah. Let's be a bit more makil about this. People are getting sick. That was the Ashkenazic tradition in Europe. So this, I suppose, had an opportunity to carry over into Ashkenazic Jewry after Ashkenazic Jews left Europe. Today, most Jews are not in Europe, and most Jews are in fact in Israel. And Israel during Sukkot doesn't get that cold. It gets pretty nice. So you really shouldn't be as lenient as we once were in Europe. But if a person is very cold and he's being honest that he can't warm himself and his room would never be this cold, he could be pater from the sukkah due to this reason. If it's not so cold, of course, you would not be pater. Important to point out, people don't sleep in the sukkah. It's not something that it's like a nice thing to do that you should sleep in the sukkah. It is a chayav. It is a chayav to sleep in the sukkah unless there's a specific reason making it tired. Okay, so some people are very sensitive. Some people just can't take that change in environment, and they're just unable to fall asleep in the sukkah. It's nothing in specific. It's not too cold. It's not too hot. It's just that difference in comfort is enough to stop them from falling asleep. So a person like this is patur from sleeping in the sukkah. So let's say in the nighttime that discomfort's enough to make him not want to sleep in the sukkah or be unable to sleep in the sukkah. But in the daytime, he's more than happy to take a nap in the sukkah and he's able to fall asleep. So then in the night, he'd be patur. In the day, he's able to sleep, he is chayav. So another conversation is married people. So for some people, it's very hard to be away from their wife for this time of Sukkot, and the wife is unable to be in the sukkah with them. So the wife or the husband, they're considered mitzvah, they want to be together. So the best thing to do is make a sukkah that the wife can sleep with him inside the sukkah. That would be really a hiddur mitzvah. It's a beautiful thing to do. Of course, a woman's not chayav in sleeping in the sukkah, but by her enabling her husband to sleep in the sukkah, that there's a huge level of mitzvah on that. But sometimes it's not possible. This is not a feasible option to make a sukkah where each couple is able to sleep in the sukkah on their own. So let's say that you have other people in the home who are using this sukkah. You can't. It's not tzanua to have women sleep in the same sukkah as men. So what do? You can't be in your sukkah with your wife. So we have to find a solution. Some say that you can sleep in the sukkah with your wife. That this level of missing your wife is enough to be mitzvah. Okay, so that's the most makil opinion. Okay, so a married person doesn't have to sleep in the sukkah because he should be with his wife. So the next opinion is that if you really are like genuinely mitzvah, if you really do miss your wife and it's really causing you suffering to not be with her, then you can be patur. The more machmir opinion is you're only patur from sleeping in the sukkah on a special night, which is the mitzvah of oneh. So in that case, you'd be patur, and all the nights the man would be chayav. So what's the practical law? Practically, if a person is going to be very upset he's not with his wife, he should, before Sukkot, make as much effort as he can to make a sukkah where both of them can sleep in the sukkah together. If it's very hard for him to make his arrangements, he lives in a city, whatever it is, and he'd be very upset, you can rely on the makil opinion and sleep in your home with your wife. Although again, you are missing out on a really geshmak mitzvah. Okay, so last slide, this idea of osek b'mitzvah patur min ha-mitzvah. So a person involved in a mitzvah, like visiting the sick, would be patur from the mitzvah of Sukkot. So how does this work? So let's say there's a sick person and he needs to be visited, someone has to do it, and you go decide to visit this person. Your entire time you're there, you're worrying about how am I going to get a sukkah, where am I going to eat, how am I going to do this? You can't focus both on the mitzvah and on eating the sukkah. So that mitzvah of sukkah is going to detract from your chesed. In this case, you are patur from eating in the sukkah and from sleeping in the sukkah. If it's very easy for you to do both, of course you should do both. Melamed has this great psak: a soldier on guard duty is considered osek in a mitzvah, Baruch Hashem, and he would be patur from eating and sleeping in the sukkah. As well, although it is usually forbidden to work on Chol HaMoed, there are certain cases where it's allowed, a whole different conversation. But if a person is forced to work on Chol HaMoed and work, he always eats a sandwich very quickly, like in between meetings, whatever it is. If it's very hard for him to get in the sukkah, from Lamed's psak, I'm sorry, I did not put okay, pause this for a second. Okay, so I realized I didn't have the source there. Seemed like a hot take, so I thought it would be good to include the source. So Pnei chapter 3, halacha 13. So a person who is in this case would be patur from eating in the sukkah.